Welcome back to another edition of the Pagcast. I'm your host, Michael Pagani, joined alongside Baltimore Orioles reporter Rich Dubroff. Rich, welcome to the Pagcast. Thank you again for coming on.
Well, thank you. Nice to be here, Michael.
2 years ago, in March of 2020, the world was, put in limbo with the coronavirus infecting first the NBA, and that really started a domino effect as that, really canceled all the rest of the leagues in the world. What is your story of when you heard the NBA was shutting down?
Well, as soon as I heard the NBA was shutting down, I knew Major League Baseball would be shutting down. And that happened, that happened the next day. So even though it was a great shock, I was, totally prepared for it, but I wasn't prepared for it to be, 4.5 months.
That was also right around when pitchers and catchers usually report, with spring training starting in April. How did you have to adapt through that uncertainty?
Well, pitchers and catcher, the spring training had already been underway, and the Orioles were getting ready to play a game in Fort Myers, Florida, against the Minnesota Twins that night. So we hadn't left for Fort Myers. We were in Sarasota, where the Orioles train, and the Orioles bus left. Left for Sarasota, and we were getting ready to go to Fort Myers. But then, just a couple of minutes later, the bus came back, and the players came back into the clubhouse. So we knew that there was an issue, and that we found out a little while later that spring training had been ended, because spring training at that point was already a month in, and they had a little over 2 weeks to go. So it was. It was quite a shock going through the whole process. I left Sarasota 2 days later, came back to Baltimore, and waited.
I remember at least with my perspective of the whole coronavirus when the NBA shut down, I was actually driving home from school, and then, I throw on the television, I put it on the TV in my living room, and I see, on TSN here in Ontario, Canada, they're talking about the NHL shutting down, and the NBA has, a positive coronavirus test. And it was a lot of uncertainty. And, as we're 2 years into this pandemic, it's kind of wild to see just how much things, have changed or really haven't changed, whether you want to look at it from either of those perspectives.
Well, the world has changed. We're learning a lot, and in a lot of ways, we're learning what we didn't know. Things have just changed incredibly. I mean, nobody used the word pandemic for a long time. We didn't know that, we were going to get vaccinated and having to have a booster shot. And learning about social distancing, and wearing masks, and I mean, for the foreseeable future, we'll be wearing masks, indoors, and where we travel. So it's a whole different world, and sports has changed, and not for the positive.
Getting into your story a bit here, how did you end up getting your foot into the sports journalism industry? Because it is a very competitive field.
Well, it certainly is. And I actually didn't start out in sports. I started out in business journalism, and I worked in TV, and I did business programming. I was the executive producer of a business show that was very popular in the United States for many years. And then I had always loved sports, and I had decided at a young age that I probably wouldn't enjoy being in sports journalism, that I wouldn't enjoy being a fan as much. But after a while, the bug was there, and I was able to start covering games on nights and on the weekends, and I did that for a long time. And then finally, in 2011, I decided to do it full time, and there was a job opening covering the Orioles, and I did that for a few outlets, and then a gentleman who had started a website, BaltimoreBaseball.com, left to go to the Athletic, and they needed somebody to step in for him, and so I joined BaltimoreBaseball.com in July 2018, and the site's been very successful since then. But it's a very, very competitive field. There are unfortunately not a lot of jobs, and there are a lot of people who want to get in it. But it's journalism is a difficult field, because not only are there not a lot of jobs, there are not a lot of well-paying jobs, and with so much competition, it's just very hard. There's so many important things in society, so many important jobs: teaching and nursing, and plumbing, and being an electrician, where they don't have enough people, and you can make a good living in many of those professions, but people want to be journalists, or they want to work in film, and it's very, very interesting. But I've been very fortunate. I've had a really good career and done a lot of wonderful things, and met wonderful people and had great experiences, and I've had no regrets.
You mentioned about the, kind of working in the TV there with the business journalism. Did you kind of build up any contacts within that portion of when you kind of didn't want to work in sports journalism that helped you out later on?
Not really, because sports and business were just so different. I haven't done business news in just in 20 years, and I know I don't keep up with that many people who are doing it, but I keep up with people in sports. And I also worked I worked for NBC News for a few years as a freelance producer, and that was a great experience that taught me a lot. But the more people the more contacts you can make, the better. One of the things that most surprised me, I know you're a university student, is sometimes I do college basketball games, and I'm shocked when I do a college basketball game that some of the young people who work on the school papers or the school radio stations or websites don't sort of come up to you and try to engage you and learn about what you're doing. I mean, I remember when I was in college, and if I was around a top professional, well, I sure engaged them and learned. But there was a young man who came up to me at a college basketball game a number of years ago and introduced himself. He was going to the university at the game, where I was covering a game, and introduced himself, and he was later used my contact to help him get started, and he's had a successful career. So whenever you get the opportunity to meet somebody who has has good experience and good contacts, you should certainly take advantage of that.
Oh, 100%. I definitely agree with you. And I think it's very important to kind of use your resources to the maximum.
Especially when you have very few resources, when you're just starting out, you need somebody. Mentors are hard to find. A lot of people don't want to be, a lot of people want to be mentored, but there are a lot of people who don't want to be a mentor. And it's just, it's hard to find. And, but, people who want to work hard, and have good attitudes will always have that advantage.
Getting into kind of your job as covering the Baltimore Orioles there, you mentioned that you started covering them in 2011 on a full-time basis after, years of freelance work. How rewarding was it to get a full-time job covering a pro baseball team?
It was great. I happened to come in. I happened to be one of the luckiest people ever because my first game as a full-time writer uh, was the last game of the 2011 season when the Orioles knocked the Red Sox out of the playoffs. Robert Andino got a hit and knocked the Red Sox out of the playoff, and the game was then known as the Curse of the Andino. And then my first full-time year was 2012, and Buck Showalter was the manager, and the Orioles made a surprising run and ended up in the postseason and were one game away from playing in the American League Championship Series. And I got to cover Buck and a really great group of Orioles players: Adam Jones, J.J. Hardy, Nick Markakis, Manny Machado, Matt Wieters, Zach Britton, guys who were very well spoken, were great players, but had a passion for the game. And Buck just made it, Buck just made it easy. And fortunately, I was older, and I knew at the time that times like that experiences like that don't happen very often. And I was very rewarded by having that relationship with Buck and Buck and the team. And then Buck was let go, and Dan Duquette, the general manager, was let go at the end of the 2018 season. And the Orioles they have a new regime, and they've struggled since. And every day I think back about how much fun those days were. And I just read a really good book about the Boston Celtics by a guy named Dan Shaughnessy, and it's called Wish It Lasted Forever. And he covered the Celtics in the early 1980s when they had Larry Bird and Robert Parrish and Kevin McHale. And he wrote about how much fun he had covering that team, what great personalities and how well they played. And it was kind of like my experience in a way covering the Orioles, and just something that I will always savor. And that, again, I may never have that experience again.
Winning cures everything, it seems like, whether it's for players, reporters, or even the fans.
No, not necessarily. For the fans, maybe, but there are teams that win that just aren't that much fun, where guys don't necessarily get along, who aren't media friendly. The great thing about those Oriole teams were that Showalter understood the media, and he made his players understand the media, the role of the media. So they were cooperative and willing to share things. And just because you look at some teams and that win, well, I don't know that Tom Brady is all that media friendly, and Bill Belichick is not all that media friendly. And yeah, for fans, it certainly doesn't. It certainly probably cures everything. But if you're covering, a team and covering someone like Bill Belichick, well, that may be, a pretty difficult experience. If I had gone from covering Buck to covering Belichick, that might have been pretty difficult for me.
I wanted to just speak upon kind of how you brought up Manny Machado there. That was really, in 2012 and, basically until 2016, those were really the prime years of, the future Gold Glover at third base with Machado. Right now, the Orioles have another hyped prospect in Adley Rushman as the new catcher. How fun is it covering, the team with that much buzz around the future?
Well, until they start winning, I don't know that it'll be that, it's been that much fun, because, getting back to what we first started talking about in the pandemic, covering teams right now is very, very difficult because we don't have the access that we did. We can't walk into a clubhouse and talk to players the way we did, prior to March 2020. And that's bad for journalists, and it's bad for fans because fans don't get to know players the way they got to know them in 2020. I see that you're a Blue Jays fan. Well, the Blue Jays had a catcher who was briefly on the team in 2020. He didn't play much. His name was Caleb Joseph, and I covered Caleb in his years in Baltimore, and he was a real media friendly player and was very, very helpful to the media, and he got to be well known as a result of us. Well, in any other environment, if there was a Zoom environment and closed clubhouses, we never would have gotten to know someone like Caleb Joseph. Well, you get to know the stars on Zoom, and for a big name player, let's say a Mike Trout, then a Max Scherzer, they might like it okay having Zoom because there aren't 30 people tripping over themselves to get to their locker after a game. But for the second and third tier players, they may never get much or any Zoom time. So covering teams is very, very difficult now. It still can be done, and we do the best we can, but it's not as enjoyable, and it's not as helpful to the fans because the fans just don't get to get the insights of players as deeply as they did prior to March 2020.
We really are missing the journalist and player connection that we kind of once had in 2018 2019, where we would always see stories released by ex reporter about their connection with a player, and that would kind of be like a feature and a special article that we wouldn't really see any other journalist release. And now it's very hard to form those connections through Zoom meetings. You know what I'm saying here?
Well, you can't. I mean, a lot of times just by going and chatting informally with a player, you get to know them, and then you get to know their story. You get to know their story. But that's not the key. That's not the case right now. It got a little better during the 2021 season, where you could interview players in person and on the field before the game, and sometimes they come into the dugout and you talk to them. And that was getting there, but it still wasn't the same. And then after the game, you still had to do Zoom. I have no idea what it's going to be like for the 2022 season. First of all, they have to, they have to come to an agreement on a new contract, and you'll have to have media access rules, and they have to agree on the health and safety protocols like they did in, for 2020 and 2021. So a long way to go here.
In 2015, the Orioles held a crowdless game against the Chicago White Sox due to civil unrest. Going into the stadium that day, how weird was it to see no fans in the stands?
It was pretty weird because I had a small part in that. I live not that far from the stadium. Live a little less than 2 miles from the stadium, and I lived not very far from where the civil unrest was occurring. And we were having a game. The Orioles were having a game against the Chicago White Sox, and then it was called off because of the unrest. And I drove home, and at first the streets were empty, and then I saw police, and the closer I got to the house, I saw police. I saw smashed windows. I saw kids walking down the street carrying items that had been looted. And then later I found out, some of those kids had jumped on my on the hood of my car It was a very, it was a very scary time in Baltimore. And then a couple of days later, they played the fanless game, and it was very weird. But then 5 years later, we had a lot of fanless games.
It kind of seems eerie that it would be something that we would see in the future, these crowdless games, whether it's the NHL or sometimes in the NFL. There it just seemed a little bit odd looking back now in the past, like wow, like 2015 there was a crowdless game, and it seems like it's all weird, and next thing you know, 5 years later, like you mentioned, it's kind of part of this normal thing.
Yeah, but 2020 wasn't very much fun watching games because being in a crowd is part of it. Listening to the fans and hearing reactions. There were things though that you picked up. I could hear arguments. I could hear arguments between the dugouts and the umpires, and foul language that you never hear otherwise. And I've never heard an umpire throw someone out of a game. And then I heard an umpire yell to a Washington Nationals coach, "You're out of here." So that was that was pretty interesting. And we got to keep balls that were hit into the press box because usually we throw them back. But 2020, I actually got hit with 2 foul balls. I'd never gotten hit by a foul ball, but then within a couple of weeks, I got hit in the exact same spot on each bicep.
Wow.
So it was a strange year.
I guess you must be paying attention at all times. That's the danger with
Yeah,
the
well,
covering baseball.
one of them I wasn't real. I was towards the end of the game and I was writing, and someone yelled up, and then it hit me. And then a few weeks later, it was the first pitch of the game, and a ball came screaming back, and I see it, and I moved, but it turned out I moved into the batting plane.
Oh man,
Because it's like it's a strange experience because you see the ball coming back, and all of a sudden it curves.
wow.
And that was weird. I curve. I got out of the way, I thought, but then the ball curved at the last second. So that was interesting. Fortunately, no serious injuries.
Well, firstly, I want to say that I'm thankful that you're not seriously injured. Secondly, those stories are kind of pretty funny, I must say. But continuing on here, the next year in 2016, we see the Orioles make the wild card game, go up against my Toronto Blue Jays, and we all remembered Edwin Encarnacion homering off of Ubaldo Jimenez. A lot of people criticized Showalter's decision to put Jimenez in instead of Zach Britton. How perplexed were you when that pitching change was made? Because Zach Britton won AL reliever of the year, I'm pretty sure, that year.
Well, Zach Britton, I voted for Zach Britton for Cy Young that year. We were just astounded. I mean, I was at the game in Toronto, and I was just astounded when Britton was never called to come into the game. And then when Ubaldo came into the game, I saw what happened, and then the season was over, and for all all purposes, basically the Orioles' run was over because the next 2 years they weren't in the playoffs. So that was an amazing game to watch because I would have thought Britain would have been in there much earlier.
Speaking of traveling to the games there, do you still travel to the games, in the 2021 season, or are you kind of watching the games from home?
I do, a combination of both. I go to all the home games. In 2021, even in 2020, I went to games in New York and Philadelphia and Washington. And then in 2021, I went to all the games in Boston, as well as the games in New York and the games in New York and Philadelphia and Washington. And I think I did about 26 or 27 road games, which is fewer than I normally I do about half of them. And then I'm hoping to do about the same number. But the only good thing about the pandemic is that we have the Zoom interviews, and that we can interview people, from far away games that we don't go to, on Zoom. So that's that's one of the few advantages.
Like you mentioned, the 2016 AL wildcard ended the Orioles' run. Do you kind of like the direction of where the rebuild is heading?
Well, I think you need to see some success. I right now I'm neutral. I don't I don't know if it's going to be a success. Let's see, let's see in a year or two. I think by the end of 2023, you ought to have an idea if this is if this is going to be successful, because the Orioles had a string of 14 straight losing seasons that ended in 2012. And they had an excellent general manager named Andy MacPhail, who was there from June 2007 till the end of 2011, but they didn't win under his direction. And then he decided not to have his contract renewed. He decided to move along, even though they wanted him to stay. And they ended up winning the year after. So you don't always see results very quickly. And, I would think, though, by the end of 2023, you'd have a pretty good idea where this thing is headed.
One of the fun things that you get to participate in as a writer is the rivalry with the Washington Nationals called the Beltway Series. How fun is it to cover such a heated rivalry?
Well, right now it's not as fun. It's not as
Yeah.
fun because the teams aren't. The two teams aren't as good. It was fun, like from 2012 to 2016, because both the Orioles and the Nationals were, were really, good teams. They were contenders. You had big crowds, and it's not it's not the same now. I think now, Orioles fans look at the Yankees and the Red Sox as more of their rivals than the Nationals.
With the draft obviously behind us, we saw the Los Angeles Angels take 20 pitchers with their draft picks, kind of a shocking move. Were you happy with the Orioles draft results?
Well, ask me in about 5 years, because you can't tell. This isn't the NFL. This isn't the NFL. The NFL, they expect draft picks to play immediately, and then if somebody hasn't done well after 3 years, they're 2 or 3 years, they're gone. That's not the same in baseball. You don't see top draft picks let go after 2 years. Not often. It does happen, but not often. So it's a very long term. The draft is a very long term process. So I think that they seem to have drafted well under Mike Elias. They seem to have gotten some good players, Adley Rushman and some others, and in a year or two we'll be able to see if the direction is an upward one.
This had to have come as a shock to see the Angels kind of pick all 20 pitchers. You have to think they're going to land one star there.
You have to, but it doesn't necessarily happen. Lots of times, I looked at, I guess in the NFL a number of years ago, a running back named Ricky Williams was traded for, the entire, an entire draft. And that didn't, I don't know that the entire draft worked out very well. So, you would think that with 20 pitchers, they'd have at least one star, but, I've seen draft classes where nobody really made it big in the major leagues.
Currently, the league is in a lockout. What does that mean for your job as a writer that is covering the team?
You got to be really inventive. You don't have a lot of access. Today, actually, we had access for the first time in nearly 4 months to Mike Elias, because the Orioles made some changes in their field. lengthening the distance from home plate to left field, and making the walls higher to discourage home runs. And we had access to him. That was the first time. But yeah, it's hard because we can't talk to a lot of players. Players are locked out. Teams can't help us get access to players. So you just have to hope that this lockout ends quickly and that we can get to spring training in a timely manner.
A lot of the discussion between the lockout is obviously over money, but I think that one of the topics that is going to be brought up is with the DH and whether there is going to be a universal DH. Do you believe that the league should adopt a universal DH?
Yes. And I think yes, and they should. They had the universal DH in 2020. You know, even going back to high school baseball now, there's a DH in high school baseball. Pitchers often don't hit in the minor leagues, so they're a tremendous disadvantage. When I was growing up, I watched pitchers hit all the time, and there were some good hitting pitchers. Now there aren't very many because they don't have the experience hitting that they did, but they did. They did in the 1960s and early 1970s. But originally I thought, well, gee, I kind of like the National League game. I like all the moves there. But now I see that, you don't want to get a pitcher hurt, during an at bat. You don't want, people don't come to the ballpark to watch a pitcher hit. You want to see a good pitcher pitch, and you want to see good hitters hit. And and we've gone too long having two sets of rules in the American League and National League. And well, let's go to one set of rules, and I think we're going to have that this year.
I have to agree with you. And I think that it would actually be better for the game if there was a universal DH like we saw in 2020. I really do think that if there were fans in the stands that, maybe we could have saw an attendance boost potentially since, a lot of people don't come to the ballpark to see a pitcher bat. It's very rare to see a pitcher get a single, get on base. We saw, I think it was Noah Syndergaard or some pitcher for the Mets that was absolutely disgusting at the plate this season. But yeah, I think that universal DH is definitely the way to go. And I agree with all the points that you brought up.
Yeah, I think that we're going to have it.
Over the last 10 seasons, we have seen some really good World Series being played. Where would you rank the 2021 World Series?
I think it was one of the worst. I actually went to one of the games as a fan. I hadn't gone to any game as a fan in about 10 years, but I went to game 2 in Houston as a fan, and it was an interesting experience. But the series, I didn't think was a terribly compelling one. I think it was one of the weaker ones that we've seen. I've watched every World Series back to 1963, so that was not a memorable one. But now I've gotten old enough so that I've seen about, I think it's almost half. I think in a year or two, this year or next year, I'll get to the point where I will have seen most of the World Series played.
That's wild. That's actually incredibly crazy to think about. Wow.
It is crazy to think about, but I've seen every Super Bowl.
That's true. That's true. Holy.
Super Bowl started in 1967.
Wow.
And I've covered, I went to a few as a fan, and I covered a few of them. But yeah, I've seen, every Super Bowl, and I've seen every, I haven't seen every World Series game since '63 because sometimes I had conflicts, but and I went to some of them, either covering them or as a fan. But yeah, last year's was not terribly memorable.
I think the one that sticks out for me is definitely Chicago Cubs and Cleveland Indians.
That was a good one.
Yeah, that one was definitely memorable for me with just whether it was game 7 or even the storyline entering with Cleveland blowing a 3-1 lead. We see the Cavaliers, they just came back from 3-1. LeBron James is in attendance. I mean, that whole series was amazing. I love that one.
Yeah, that was really a terrific World Series because no matter who won, they were going to be breaking a long a long dry spell.
As we're closing off this interview here, what advice do you have for aspiring sports journalists?
Work work hard. Don't make a work hard. Don't make a spectacle of yourself. Uh, be true to yourself. Be be fair to the people you interview. Be fair to yourself, and be fair to your audience.
Well, I'd like to thank again Rich Dubroff for joining me on today's podcast. Thank you again, Rich.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you, Michael. Good luck to you.